It's England. It's USA. It's Iran. And it's Wales. It's Group B. And it's the 2002 FIFA World Cup in Qatar. It's the International Soccer Preview by Soccerphiles Canada. Hello, it's the International Soccer Preview by Soccerphiles Canada. I'm Kevin.
And I'm Connor.
And we'll be doing a group-by-group preview in this series. The podcast is looking at Group B of World Cup finals, made up of England, USA, Iran, and Wales. This series will be followed by our next one, which is a team-by-team look at their players. And then shortly before the Cup, we'll be doing another podcast series with final updates on both of these, the teams and the players.
So this series features a deep dive into the World Cup finals history of the teams. For a deeper dive still, you can check out any of the 9 podcast series we have done so far, and we'll talk more about that at the end of the podcast.
Right, but for this one, we've organized it into 3 sections that we'll cover in this podcast. So tell us about part 1, Connor.
So in part 1, we begin with a look at who is in the group, which pot they came from, their colors and nickname, and some geographical information about each country, comparing how big each country is in relation to the others in the group.
Right, and then part 2 is the longest section. It's a team-by-team overview, and we'll be giving a quick review of their participation and major achievements, an overview of their World and Regional Cup history, and in this series, a deep dive into their World Cup finals history. And we'll be giving particular attention to their recent tournaments and games.
And then in part 3, we end with a summary of each team and a sense of their current form as we head into a comparison of the teams to their FIFA and ELO rankings, head-to-head meetings, and the odds on their success. That will launch us into discussion of their prospects and our predictions.
All right, and then at the end, we'll provide our address and the links so that those who want to delve into more history on the teams can check previous podcasts. And actually, for those who want to delve into less history, we'll be putting together kind of a collection of part 3s of this podcast for those who just want the last part leading into the World Cup. There is, by the way, a YouTube version of this and a podcast version. So they're actually the same broadcast, but the YouTube version has simple graphics to follow while one listens along. And those also can be found in the show notes.
Great.
Well, I'm wearing, once again displaying how feeble my international soccer shirt collection is. I can only go with a Cardiff City t-shirt to show my slight bias towards Wales in this podcast. How about you?
Well, I'm wearing a Cardiff City jersey as well, but it's from their red era. So it's a red jersey with a dragon on the crest. So it is my stand-in for Wales. Also, not disguising really my bias here.
That's right. It won't be too obvious in this podcast, but we can't help ourselves. So we might as well just admit it. Let's move on to part 1, the overview of the 4 teams. Over to you, Connor.
All right. So the part 1 team in this group is England. They're nicknamed the 3 Lions, and you'll see them wearing their traditional white kit. The part 2 team is the United States. Their nickname is the Yanks, the Stars and Stripes, the red, white, and blue. They also wear white with a red and blue trim. The pot 3 team is Iran. Interestingly, USA is near the bottom of pot 2 and Iran near the top of pot 3. So they're actually fairly close. But Iran is the pot 3 team. Their nickname is Team Melli, which basically means the national team. And they traditionally wear red. And then the pot 4 team is Wales, nicknamed the Dragons, and they also wear red.
Yeah, it's a bit of a lighter shade of red than than Iran there, but obviously one of them won't be wearing their colors when they play each other.
Yeah, and we should mention with Wales being the pot four team, it's kind of a quirk. They're ranked 18th overall in the FIFA rankings, which are used to determine the pots, which is slightly below the US and slightly ahead of Iran. However, they ended up in pot four, kind of by a quirk of qualification. Um, their games, their playoff games to qualify for the World Cup, their four-team group included Ukraine. So those games were delayed by a couple months. So what they did is they just kind of plunked Wales into pot four as a placeholder. So they're really out of place. They don't really fit where their ranking is. I'll note that other teams that went through the similar playoff, like Portugal, whose teams weren't delayed, they're put in a pot based on their rankings, but Wales isn't. So they're the 18th place team ranked in pot four. So what do you make of that, Kevin?
I think I feel some latent hostility about it from you. And I actually didn't realize until you pointed it out. But since you have pointed it out, I've been thinking, that kind of makes this a tough group. We have, in effect, a pot one team and then three teams that are pretty close to pot two. That's got to make it about the toughest group here. Do you think it is?
I think you can make that argument. I mean, the other pot four teams are ranked 37th and lower. So Wales being 18th, they really stick out. So you're right. They really shouldn't be a pot four team. I haven't actually heard that much commentary on it. But I think Wales can consider themselves aggrieved, I guess, for not being in a higher pot. I guess it would have put them only in pot three. But yeah,
Wales and all the other teams too. Like it means also United States and Iran are not really playing a pot four team.
Absolutely. So I do think there is some injustice, and I think FIFA kind of did this just because it was convenient and they didn't really know how to handle the situation of Wales game taking place after the draw. But perhaps they should have delayed it because it does stick out.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. And I guess I would say that if you're the only one, or if our podcast is the only one pointing it out, then good for us, because I think it's a significant point.
Yeah, absolutely. But anyways,
Yeah.
we can move on.
Okay, well, let's move on to a bit of a geographical description of each country.
All right, so beginning with England, they're one of the smaller countries, or in the smaller half of countries in terms of size at 130,000 square kilometers, but they're the 8th largest in terms of population among teams competing in the World Cup at 56 million people. So I actually didn't realize that they were kind of relatively a large country in terms of the population size.
Right.
But yeah, there you go.
Yeah. Okay. USA next.
The USA is the second largest country in terms of area, just under 10 million square kilometers. But they are the first overall in population, 333 million people. So they are the largest country by population competing in the World Cup.
Right. And in the Players podcast, we're going to see that kind of number of players yield is kind of influencing the player situation in USA there. Okay, well, Iran is in the Middle East, kind of to the northwest of India.
Yeah, northwest of India and just east of Iraq. It's 1.6 million square kilometers, so it's a large country. It's the 8th largest among countries in the World Cup. And at 86 million people, it's the 5th largest in terms of population. So all three countries that we've talked about so far, they're in the top 25% in terms of population. So big countries represented here.
Yeah, I didn't actually realize Iran was such a large land mass there. Anyway, moving on to Wales, which is just west of England on the same landmass.
Yeah, and I guess from big countries to small, Wales is the second smallest in both population and area, just 20,000 square kilometers. So quite a bit smaller than England, and just 3.3 million people. So Yeah, quite a small country to be competing at these finals.
Yeah, I mean that in itself makes their presence here a bit of an achievement with such a small population. There's my bias coming out, Connor. Okay, let's take a look at the three in comparison. You've talked about it a little bit in your discussion, but just to put them side by side here.
Yeah, so in terms of population, starting with the biggest, we have the USA at 333 million, Iran at 86 million, England at 56 million, and Wales at a mere 3.3.
Wow, that is what 100 times smaller than USA.
That's right, 100 times smaller. And we mentioned our bias for Wales, but I guess we should mention that you, of course, grew up in Wales. That's the reason for the bias. We come by it honestly.
That's right. That's right. I have a bit of a bias towards England, but to be honest, there are things I like about all of these teams, and USA's kind of grittiness in soccer is one of the things I like about that country. Are we ready to move on to part two, the team by team?
Yeah, let's. I'll let you take it away with England, starting with their participation and achievements.
All right. Well, England's first international game was in 1872, so they're considered the they are the inventors of the game, although others have taken it to new heights. They're the oldest soccer nation, but actually not a senior team as far as the World Cup goes. As mentioned, the game was invented in England, and 1872 was considered the first international match played between England and, Connor, do you know?
Scotland, I believe.
Yeah, Scotland in 1872. But as far as the World Cup goes, before 1950, they had a dispute with FIFA in 1928, and they refused to join the World Cup, instead playing their home nations team in the British Home Championships. Those were basically British teams. After reconciling with FIFA in 1946, they have participated every time since 1950. And in the Euro Cup, they missed the first edition in 1960, but they have participated regularly since. And how have they done, Connor?
Yeah, in terms of their achievements, though England's seen as a dominant power for most of their history, they have only won one major competition, the World Cup in 1966 when they hosted it. They have never won the Euro Cup, and third place in 1968 was their best result until recently, almost equaled when they hosted in 1996, finishing in the semifinal with no third place playoff.
All right, well, let's go a bit deeper into things with an overview of their World Cup history. And yeah, as mentioned above, England didn't participate in World Cup play before the war. They qualified consistently from 1950 through 1966, where they won it, until 1970. In 1974, though, they failed to qualify, and then shocked even further by failing in 1978 also. That would only happen once more in 1994. Similarly, they failed to pass the group stage 3 times, most famously in a shocking loss to USA in their first World Cup in 1950, and then again in 1958. They failed to pass the group stage. 2014 made it a third time. Otherwise, they've reached the quarterfinals more than half the time, though fourth placed in 1990 is their second best result. Oh, I guess, yeah, their second best result.
Yeah,
all right. So, sorry, go.
Yeah, their best result coming recently, which we will talk about.
Yes, exactly. Okay, so we're entering our deep dive now into the World Cup finals, which we've divided into 5 parts. So part 1 of 5 deals with before 1950. So kind of repeating some of the stuff I said above. But actually, England consider their first World Cup game to be a game in 1934 against Italy, who had won the FIFA World Cup. England termed the match the real World Cup because they considered themselves, not without merit, the best team in the world. But that strain of arrogance runs through their history. That game with Italy became known as the Battle of Highbury and included several broken bones. One early on to the foot of defender Luis Monti, that's the Italian defender Luis Monti, which played a big part in England going up 3-0 just 12 minutes into the game. Italy rallied in the second half with the Italian great Giuseppe Meazza scoring twice, but England won in what a young Stanley Matthews, one of the England greats, described as the most violent game in his career. Connor, whenever you hear a title of a game that begins with the Battle of, that usually refers to the violence of the game.
Yeah, there's a few throughout history, but yeah, shocking in that one.
Yeah. Anyway, part 2 of 5 deals with 1950 to 1966, and over to you, Connor.
So Stanley Matthews, who you mentioned, plays a role, or rather didn't, in that inauspicious 1950 World Cup. Despite being their best player, he was not fielded in their second game against the USA, England having won over Chile in their opener. This was likely because the USA seemed so small a threat. But substitutions were not yet part of the game, so they could not field him as the USA clung on to a 1-0 lead. Some newspapers in England actually reported the score as a 10-1 win for England, thinking the news from Brazil, the host, must have been a mistake. But it was true. The game finished 1-0, and then England would go on to lose their third game to Spain by the same margin and were out, despite being heavy favorites.
Ooh.
The 1954 Cup was notable for its odd structure. Despite being in groups of 4, teams played only 2 of the others, and games went to extra time. The opening game with Belgium proved dramatic. Belgium went up at 5 minutes, but England came back and were up 3-1 by 63 minutes. The tide turned, and Belgium scored at 67 and 71 to equalize. Regular time ended that way, and strangely, the group stage game went to extra time, where England scored quickly in the 91st minute. However, they gave up an own goal in the 94th, and the game ended that way, 4-4. England went on to beat Switzerland and top the group. In another odd feature, group winners were paired with other group winners in the quarterfinal, while second-place finishers had an easier pairing with other second-place finishers.
That is crazy.
Yeah, that makes no sense. And it proved costly for England. They were paired with defending champions Uruguay, who had won their group, and England lost that game 2-4.
Wow.
1958 saw England tying all teams in the group stage, being USSR, Brazil, and Austria. Tied with USSR for second place, it went to a playoff game that USSR won. 1962 was also fairly unremarkable. They lost to Hungary in their opener but beat Argentina. In the third match, they tied Bulgaria but advanced in second, and they lost to eventual champions Brazil 1-3 in the quarterfinals. England nevertheless had high hopes for 1966, which they hosted. There, they tied their first game with Uruguay, but won all their games after that. The quarterfinal with Argentina was controversial, as one South American was sent off for the look on his face at 35 minutes. England won the game 1-0. The final with Germany was classic, with Germany scoring in the 90th minute to tie the game 2-2. In the 101st minute, Jeffrey Hurst took a shot which hit the underside of the crossbar and went straight down, then bounced back out. Even today, it's impossible to tell with the naked eye if it went in. But of course, Germany felt the awarding of the goal was more because of home advantage. But the goal stood, and England took home their only World Cup.
Right, great. All right. Well, part 3 of 5 deals with 1970 to 1990. So 1970 featured what is considered to be the best save in World Cup history. Having won 1-0 over Romania in the first game, the save happened in the second game against Brazil, nicknamed the Clash of Champions. I'm not sure. Yeah, I guess England having won the previous cup. Pele perfectly headed across down into the bottom right corner of Gordon Banks's goal. Although Banks was positioned in the middle of his net a few steps forward, he not only managed to dive and reach the shot, but somehow deflected it over the bar and out. Pele is said to have applauded the save on the field and maintained throughout his life that he couldn't believe it was saved. Banks, in fact, made several excellent saves in the game, but they lost 0-1. A 1-0 win over Czechoslovakia saw them through in second place to the quarterfinals, which turned out to be against West Germany, so a replay of the 1966 final. England was ahead 2-0 despite keeper Gordon Banks being out with food poisoning. An overconfident England subbed out star player Bobby Charlton in a new substitution rule and promptly lost control of the midfield. Germany got 2 goals back to tie it. The replacement goalie making mistakes that Gordon Banks probably wouldn't have, and they won in extra time to avenge 1966. As we mentioned before, England failed to reach the next 2 cups, but returned for an unremarkable campaign in 1982. It started well, winning all games over France, Czechoslovakia, and Kuwait in the group stage. That brought them to the 3-team second group stage. There, they had scoreless ties with West Germany and with host Spain to finish second in the group. But only West Germany, who had beaten Spain in the other game, advanced to the final, which they won. In 1986, England lost to Portugal in their opener and tied Morocco 0-0. Forward Gary Lineker pulled them through, scoring a hat-trick. All 3 games in a 3-0 win. All 3 goals in a 3-0 win over Poland. England finished second behind an unlikely Morocco. In the round of 16, they beat Paraguay, but the tournament is really famous for their quarterfinal loss to Argentina. It saw Diego Maradona score 2 famous goals, one of them termed the Hand of God goal, which is a quirky goal featuring a great dribble by Madonna, a failed clearance by a defender lobbed back to the goalie, and Maradona's leap, which looked like a header but was actually punched in with his fist, thus the Hand of God goal, which he termed it that way, by the way. The second was an amazing run from his own half through England's defence, and both of those goals have become classics. 1990 was a dull group stage that England won over Ireland and the Netherlands, both of whom they tied, and Egypt, who they beat 1-0. In the round of 16, they beat Belgium 1-0 in extra time. The goal scored at the very last moment at 1:19. The quarterfinal featured surprise package Cameroon. England saw themselves down 1-2 as the game drew to a close, but they were awarded a penalty at 83 and then another penalty in extra time, and they converted both. They lost to West Germany on penalties in the semi-finals, which initiated an ongoing anxiety over penalty shootouts that continues to the current day. They then lost to Italy in the 3rd place match for a 4th place finish. Part 4 of 5, 1990 to 2010, or it should be 1994 to 2010.
Well, they failed to reach the 1994 Cup. So we'll go to 1998, where they finished second in the group stage behind a strong Romania with the famous George Hagi at the helm. England lost to them, but beat Colombia and Tunisia to reach the round of 16. It was a much anticipated game against Argentina, given their 1986 meeting, and it did not disappoint. Argentina scored on a penalty at 6 minutes, and England equalized on a penalty at 10 minutes. A young Michael Owen scored again at 16 minutes, and England looked to go into the break up a goal until Argentina tied it up in first half injury time. Early in the second half at 47 minutes, David Beckham took a second yellow card and thus a red for a petulant but minor kick out after a rough tackle. However, England held on and no goals were scored in the second half or in extra time. The game went to penalties. Manager Glenn Hoddle had not practiced penalties, believing there was no way to prepare for the pressure of the real situation, a fact that did not reflect well after the 3-4 loss in the penalty shootout.
Any opinion on that, Connor? The penalties? Was he mad?
I think he was mad. I think now it's the pendulum swung the other way, where players over-prepare trying to predict, what a player or a goalie will do based on past performance. But yeah, to not prepare at all. Whether that's
Yeah.
the reason they lost, but it didn't help, in my opinion.
Well, another pattern recently that I think we're going to end up talking about here is sometimes the best players now don't even want to take penalties.
Yeah, that's very true.
Anyway, on we go.
All right, so we pick it up in 2002, which also saw England pitted against Argentina in the group stage this time. However, it yielded no drama this time. England won the game 1-0 and otherwise tied Sweden and Nigeria to advance in second, while Argentina was knocked out in third. The only real drama came in the quarterfinals after England beat Denmark 3-0 in the round of 16. England was preparing to go into halftime with a 1-0 lead over Brazil when Brazil equalized, and in the second half, it was Brazil's Ronaldinho taking center stage, catching England's goalkeeper out on a brilliant free kick at the 50th minute, but then getting a harsh red card at 57. Brazil's 10 men held on, though, knocking England out and eventually winning the World Cup. The 2006 group stage started with England beating Paraguay on an own goal from Beckham free kick at 3 minutes for the only goal of the game, and a spunky Trinidad and Tobago who kept the game scoreless until Peter Crouch scored a header, which featured him pulling on the dreadlocks of a defender, which went unnoticed and unpunished. After a win over Ecuador in the round of 16, they were knocked out by Portugal in the quarterfinal. This too was a famous game for Wayne Rooney getting red carded, a decision which seemed to be influenced by his Manchester United teammate Cristiano Ronaldo, who winked over to his bench when the deed was complete.
What a devil. Okay, part 5 of 5 covers 2010 to 2014. And 2010 was a flat performance. The tournament opened with a goal at 4 minutes against USA, but at 40, an innocuous shot was mishandled by England's keeper, Robert Green. It effectively cost him his career, at least with the national team. Although the real problem was England's lack of urgency in pushing for a goal in the second half, which went scoreless. A goalless draw with Algeria was followed by a drab 1-0 win over Slovenia to advance in second behind USA. The Americans once again getting the better of England as they did in 1950. The quarterfinals saw a 1-4 loss to Germany, but it featured an uncanny echo of the 1966 World Cup final. Connor described the goal in the World Cup final as hitting the crossbar and bouncing straight down. In this game, an English shot hit the goal, hit the crossbar again, bounced straight down and then out. In 1966, it had been counted as a goal, but the same thing was determined not to be a goal. I don't know if they actually used technology, but this one was slightly more obvious, and it was not given as a goal.
Well, they didn't use technology at this time. I mean, it would have been a goal had a simple goal line technology being used. And I think it kind of hastened it in because it was such a high profile game. And frankly, it was England that it kind of, I think, created a push for bringing that sort of technology in.
Are you saying it did go over the line?
Yes, the ball did go over the line, but it was no goal.
Okay.
And I think it did hasten the use of goal line technology after the fact.
I see. Okay, well, I'd like to look at that one again. Okay, anyway, moving on to 2014. That saw them in a group of death with Italy and Uruguay. It truly was a group of death, although the fourth team, Costa Rica, was given no chance. After a disappointing loss to Italy, where they actually seemed the better team, they were dismantled by tricky Uruguay, especially tricky Luis Suarez, and they were out after game 2. The unlikely Costa Rica tied them scoreless in the third game, and won the group, believe it or not.
Yeah, that was remarkable.
Right. Well, we're going to look at 2018 in a little more detail here because it was their last cup. So take it away, Connor.
All right, so we'll start with qualifying. England went undefeated in qualifying for the 2018 World Cup, but suffered away draws with Slovenia and Scotland. It was not altogether a convincing performance since they relied on 2 injury time goals to salvage points. England allowed no attempts on goal to host Slovakia, had a 10-man advantage due to a Slovakian red card at 57, and hit the woodwork, but it took until the 95th minute to get the only goal of the game and win. There's also a thrilling end to a classic Scotland versus England match. Following England's opening goal at the 70th minute, Scotland came back with 2 goals on well-taken free kicks by Lee Griffiths at 87 and 90, only to suffer a draw when England's new captain, Harry Kane, got an equalizer at the 93rd minute.
Cool.
England also required a goal in the 94th minute to overcome Slovenia at home. Nevertheless, they beat Slovakia, Lithuania, and Malta twice each, and finished with a record of 8 wins and 2 draws. In the World Cup Finals tournament, they beat Tunisia on an injury time penalty, but then crushed Panama to secure advancement after Game 2. The third game paired basically England's and Belgium's B teams, and England kind of won by losing. They lost the match to finish second, but placed themselves on the far easier route to the final than Belgium. In the knockout round, they suffered an equalizer in injury time against Colombia in the round of 16, but overcame their penalty shootout hex to advance, and then they beat Sweden after that. In the semifinal, they took the lead against Croatia, but lost in extra time and ended up having to settle for 4th by losing for a second time to Belgium. So perhaps making a bit too much of their success, England nevertheless had their best result since 1966 when they won the tournament at home.
Yeah, I think I'm going to dispute that they overcame their penalty hex. I think it's still a bit of a bugaboo for them. Would you agree?
I think they. I think it was important that they won this one. I think Southgate had them well prepared. So I guess it remains to be seen. I think perhaps the next penalty shootout could be determinative whether it kind of gives them the jitters still or not. But overall, 4th place was a pretty good achievement for a young England side.
Yeah, definitely, and gives them a bit of promise going into this World Cup. And actually, that's what we're going to deal with next is this World Cup, just the qualification for 2020.
So England had a very solid qualification, tying only Poland away and also at home to Hungary. And they finished 1st in the qualifying group, 6 points ahead of 2nd place Poland. So quite comfortable for them. They did score in the 85th minute to secure a home win over Poland. That was in their 3rd match and kind of set them on for success in the group.
Yeah, Hungary seems a bit of a what do you call it? A team that kind of like USA gets the better of them.
Yeah, for sure. England, a win and a tie here, but we'll talk about Hungary again shortly.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's go on to the Euro Cup history. And in this podcast, we're just doing an overview. We'll take a deeper dive the next time they qualify or the next time they're in a European Cup. But in an overview, less convincing in all respects is their Euro Cup record. Having not entered the first edition in 1960, they failed to qualify for 3 of their first 4. However, the one they did qualify for in 1968 led to their best finish, a 3rd place finish. Their poor record continued over the next 4 editions to 1992, reaching only the group stage in 3 and not qualifying for the other, winning only 1 of their 9 games in the process, including losing all 3 games in 1988. hosting in 1996 brought them out of this slump with a semi-final finish, and they have passed the group stage in 4 of the last 6 editions. Even with that, though, recent history has not been impressive. They once again failed to reach the Cup in 2008 and have only gone one step beyond the group stage when they have passed it. They went into the 2020 Cup more hopeful, given that their clubs had been doing well in European competition. So let's see if it reflected at the international level.
So for Euro 2020, England stormed through an easy qualifying group, scoring 37 goals in 10 games.
Wow.
And dropping points only in an away loss to the Czech Republic. Kosovo, Bulgaria, and Montenegro were the other teams. And that loss to Czech Republic came with a goal scored at 85th minute, so they lost it kind of right at the end there.
Right.
But really didn't trouble them. And then, in terms of the finals themselves, England played almost all games at home at Wembley Stadium. Of course, this was the Euro where it was held in various locations. So they played almost all their games in London except the quarterfinal match, which was played in Rome. They beat Croatia and Czech Republic in single-goal games, and went scoreless with Scotland to finish first in the group stage. After that, they beat Germany and then Ukraine. And then in the semifinals, they beat Denmark in extra time. In the final, England lost to Italy on penalties, inexperienced players missing their last 3 shots. So perhaps penalties catching up with them again.
Yeah, I think although they were quite satisfied with that result, the penalty bear came back, and I wonder if it'll be a factor if they have another important penalty shootout down the road.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see. And I agree, second place was a great result, but to go as far as penalties and lose, obviously disappointing.
Yeah, I don't know if we're going to talk about that trend, because it's not just England who are actually subbing in inexperienced players to take these penalties, but it's more a factor of the veterans just saying, no. Can you think of a reason for that? Is their reputation on the line here?
I'm not sure. I mean, the biggest case of reputation being damaged on penalty shoot would be Asamoah Gyan for Ghana when he missed in the World Cup against Uruguay and vowed to never take a penalty again.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
Roberto Baggio is remembered too for his miss in I can't remember what year it was, 1998 maybe.
Yeah, I think 94. But yeah, 94. Yeah, you're right about that. I think what clubs are trying to do is just find who are the best penalty kick takers, and perhaps discounting experience. Perhaps just doing kind of raw scores. But I think in a pressure situation, I think that experience matters, and I think you could use that England loss in penalties to Italy as perhaps a case in point.
Yeah, yes, you're right. Southgate does maintain that he was choosing the best penalty takers, and it wasn't about that. But it'll be very interesting to see whether there's a word I'm looking for that's not bugaboo, but it's like something that torments or haunts them. But I kind of think they will be haunted if they have another big penalty shootout down the road. We're going to look at you. I thought you were going to help me out with that word there, Connor.
I can't think of it, so I'm sorry.
I'm going to think about it like 10 minutes after the podcast here. Okay, well, let's take a look at the recent and upcoming games. Most of them have been actually UEFA Nations League A games, which started in June, and they've played 4 of 6 games. That'll be true for all of the European teams. But they have a couple of friendlies in there. Do you want to take us through it?
Yeah, so 2022 started with friendly wins against Switzerland and Ivory Coast. And then in their 4 Nations League A games, they've actually yet to register a win. We mentioned Hungary. They've lost to Hungary twice, including 4-0 at home. And that those games, in between those 2 games, was a tie in Germany and a tie at home against Italy. But 2 losses, 2 draws from the Nations League so far. So not ideal form, but they'll have a couple more Nations League games.
Yeah, they have Italy away and Germany at home in September.
Yeah, so those are the important games.
It's reminding me of a story, and I didn't write it down here, so I can't remember the details. But I remember during that period, maybe it was when they were not a part of FIFA, we talked about the game they played against World Cup winners Italy around 1934. But Hungary was actually the strongest team in the world around in the early 50s, and England decided to kind of prove that they were better, and they went over to play Hungary. I think they played home and away. Do you know about that?
Vaguely, yeah. We might have talked about it previously.
Yeah, I mean, the long and short of it is they got slaughtered by Hungary. So that's a kind of an ongoing history with Hungary here. And I gotta say, this 4-0 loss at home is a kind of the next chapter of that story. Would you say?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, Hungary seemed by far the weakest team in that group compared to Germany and Italy, and yeah, that's as bad a home loss probably in recent memory for England.
Yeah, they just Hungary just seems to have their number. Okay, well, we'll finish with a look at the World Cup schedule. In what order do they play? Do they play these teams? Take it away, Connor.
So England starts with Iran, plays USA second, and then they finish with the derby match, if you will, against Wales.
All right, and we're going to consider that a little more in part 3, whether there's any significance to the order of their fixtures. But now we're going to move on to part 2, USA. When was their first international game, Connor?
It was in 1885, if you can believe it.
Yeah, that's pretty old. In most cases, that was an Englishman coming over to other countries and kind of spreading the good word, if you will. So I imagine that's how it happened in the US too. All right, well, let's begin with a look at their participation and achievements. And the USA actually has a much longer soccer tradition than most people would guess. Few people realize that they not only entered the first World Cup in 1930, but they took 3rd place there. The only cup they failed to participate in was in 1938 when they withdrew. Ironically, their participation in the regional cup in North America, North and Central America, is not as good. They didn't enter the first 4. They didn't enter 4 of the first 5 editions, although they participated consistently from 1973 onwards. They've won the competition several times in recent years, but their first title was relatively late in 1991. I think I was treading on your part there because you were going to tell us about their achievements.
Yeah, well, I'll kind of summarize some of what you said, but their best achievement in World Cup play is 3rd place in 1930, as you mentioned, the very first World Cup. More recently, it's reaching the quarterfinal stage in the 2002 World Cup, where they were knocked out by Germany. They never won the regional title before 1990, as you mentioned, but won the first Gold Cup, kind of a revamped tournament, in 1991, and have taken the title in half of the editions since. In the Confederations Cup, they pulled off a remarkable 2nd place finish in 2009 for their best result in 3 appearances there. Finally, they have taken 4th place in 2 Copa Americas, 1995 and 2016.
Right. We're not really going to get into competitions outside of the World Cup and Regional Cup, but yes, Confederations Cup and Copa America are other competitions which we will probably discuss in a future podcast. But let's now move on to a World Cup overview. And despite that impressive continuity in World Cup play, at least, because it wasn't in Regional Cup play, their history is best described as 2 separate periods of ascendancy. The first was in the early years when they participated in the World Cups and sometimes surprised. In addition to their 3rd place in 1930, they pulled a shock win over England, which you described in 1950, beating the 250-1 odds there.
Wow.
From 1954 to 1994, however, they failed to qualify for the World Cup, even when Mexico left the door open. Their second period of ascendancy started from 1994 and was motivated by their hosting of the World Cup that year. From that time, they have been almost on par with Mexico, and the two dominate their region. They have qualified for every World Cup from 1994 to 2014, uh, though that is partly the strength of their region that makes it easy for them to get one of the 3.5 World Cup spots available. We're going to talk about that CONCACAF qualification system a bit later on. They made a big impact in 2002, reaching the quarterfinals. Hey, Connor, I forgot to jump in earlier and say I was at that game between USA and Germany.
Right, when you were living in South Korea, yes.
Yeah, and I actually reviewed the YouTube video of it later, and really, America kind of deserved to win that game.
They were very good in that World Cup.
Yeah, they. I'll probably be talking about it in more detail here, so I'll just finish this section. They passed the group stage 4 out of 6 times between 1994 and 2014, and we'll take a look at 2018 in more detail later. Are you ready for the deep dive, Connor?
Yeah, take it away. We've divided this into 3 parts, so I'll let you begin with 1930 to 1950.
All right. Well, traveling to Uruguay was a bit less of a burden for them than it was for European teams, but they still did well to make a long journey and thus established themselves as a veteran team, although many people don't regard them as such a long-lived soccer nation. They also did well, beating Paraguay and Belgium, both 3-0 in the group stage. They advanced to the semi-final with Argentina, but there they were crushed 1-6. There is a question as to whether there was a third place match, with some reports saying there was one, which Yugoslavia won 3-1 over USA. But FIFA itself officially lists USA in third place, but that seems to be based on their record in other games rather than any playoff between them. Yeah, there's no official playoff. So I've called it a semi-final reaching the semi-finals. Anyway, moving on, USA also reached the World Cup in Italy in 1934. The qualification is actually an interesting story in itself, but we'll focus on the finals here. The tournament format was basically what the final stages are now, a knockout from the round of 16 onwards. So USA's tournament consisted of one game, which was a 1-7 loss to host Italy. It was hardly worth the 6,000-mile round trip, but that was the same for all non-European teams. Brazil, Argentina, and Egypt all knocked out after one game. Maybe that's part of the reason they boycotted in 1938, hey?
Yeah, as did many others from the Americas.
Yeah, that's right. Anyway, yes, they did withdraw from the 1938 World Cup, not so much because of what I just described, but because of a decision to hold it in Europe for the second time in a row. The initial agreement was that it would alternate between the Americas, probably South America and Europe. So it ended up that Cuba and Brazil were the sole participant from the Americas. But for that, except for that, they would have constant appearances for the first 4 World Cups, because they did qualify for the Brazil edition in 1950. And there they started with a 1-3 loss to Spain. The historical game, though, was their 1-0 win over England in Game 2. They scored in the 38th minute and hung on despite England being vastly superior. We've talked about that game before, so we won't recount it all here. Instead, we'll move on to the game after that, which was a 2-5 loss to Chile in the third game, and the USA finished last. But they had prevented England from advancing, since only the top team in the group, Spain, moved on. But after that, it would be 40 years until USA qualified again. And that takes us to part 2, Connor, 1990 to 2002.
Yeah, so the USA did have qualified consistently from 1990 onwards. 1990 saw the tail end of their weak period, even within the region, and they lost all 3 games in the Cup, beginning with a 1-5 loss to Czechoslovakia. They lost the other 2 games also, but by more respectable margins to Italy and Austria. In 1994, the USA hosted, but still only scraped through the group stage. They earned a draw with Switzerland in their opener and beat Colombia in the second match. That game became infamous when the Colombian scorer of the own goal that saw the USA win was shot not long after his return to Colombia. The USA lost their 3rd game to an in-form Romania and finished 3rd in the group, tied with Switzerland but behind on goal difference. They nevertheless advanced in 3rd and faced Brazil. The USA gained an advantage when Brazil took a red card in the 43rd minute. However, the USA gave up that advantage by getting their own red card at 64 minutes, and Brazil scored the only goal of the game 8 minutes later. In 1998, suggested that their success had only been due to hosting, as they lost all games there to Germany, Iran, and Yugoslavia. But that proved false with a competitive campaign in 2002, starting emphatically, going 3-0 up on Portugal by the 26th minute and winning the game 3-2. They tied host South Korea in their second game.
I was there.
All right, cheering on Korea. So yeah, that was their second game, and despite losing to Poland in their 3rd game, they advanced to the knockout round in 2nd place. They beat Mexico in the round of 16, interesting matchup, and played well enough. They played well enough to beat Germany in the quarterfinals, but lost 0-1, as you mentioned. So a valiant effort, but falling short.
Right. Yeah. So just for listeners who haven't listened to the podcast before, I lived in Korea for 15 years. So I obviously have a little bit of a bias there. But I was there for the 2002 World Cup. In fact, your dad came over to join me for that. It was great.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we move on to part 3 of 3, which is 2006 to 2014. And 2006 saw them lose their opener 0-3 to Czech Republic. They faced Italy in a rough match in the next game, where 3 yellow cards were handed out. A nasty one by Italy at 27, for which the player got a 4-game suspension, and then 2 red cards to USA for lesser fouls at 45 and 47, so on both sides of the half. USA clung on to a tie despite only 9 men, and they also only used 2 subs in the game. They lost to Ghana in the 3rd game, victims of a soft penalty just before halftime, but they were unable to recover in a scoreless second half. So that put them out at the group stage. In 2010, they met England in their opener, and again disappointed England's ambitions with a 1-1 draw. In game 2, they came back from 0-2 down to tie Slovenia, and even scored a late winner, but it was disallowed for reasons that never really became clear. They also suffered a valid goal disallowed in their 3rd game against Algeria, but on the brink of going out, they scored a late winner that saw them finish ahead of England in 2nd. In the round of 16, they met Ghana again. That's again because they met them in 2006. They went down a goal at 5 minutes, but equalized on a penalty at 72. The game went to extra time, but Ghana scored quickly 3 minutes in, and took that lead to the end. So 2014 began with them facing Ghana yet again. That's the 3rd cup in a row there. And this time they won 2-1, scoring just 22 seconds in, and then getting the winning goal at 86. In the 2nd game against Portugal, they were on the verge of winning until Cristiano Ronaldo set up an equalizer at 90+4. That's 4 minutes into injury time. They got the last laugh, though, advancing in second ahead of Portugal, despite losing to Germany in the third game. In the round of 16, they took Belgium to extra time thanks to the heroics of goalkeeper Tim Howard. The game ended 0-0, but the extra time period saw 3 goals, Belgium getting the first 2 of them. I think actually Tim Howard set a record for the most saves in the World Cup that game.
Yeah, that rings a bell.
Oh, okay. Anyway, the USA got one back, and they had several chances for an equalizer, but they were unable to find one. So knocked out by Belgium in the round of 16 there in 2014. And then you're going to take us through their most recent World Cup in 2018.
Right. So in 2018, they were one of the top 6 ranked teams in CONCACAF to receive a bye through to round 4 of 5. That's not unusual. There are a lot of small teams in CONCACAF, so there's quite a few stages in qualifying. The USA was strong at home, winning all games, but they tied Trinidad and Tobago and lost to Guatemala on the road, nevertheless finishing first in the round 4 group. In round 5, which is known as the Hex, they lost to Mexico and Costa Rica at home and went winless on the road. This included a humiliating 0-4 loss in Costa Rica, ties with Panama, Mexico, and Honduras, and most bitterly, a loss to Trinidad and Tobago's B team in the final game.
Wow.
Yeah. That conspired with 2 other results, Honduras's win over group winners Mexico and Panama's win over second place finishers Costa Rica, to kind of create a perfect storm that shocked the U.S. out of the World Cup for the first time since 1986. So just to reiterate, they finished 5th out of the 6-team group and failed to advance.
Yeah, that was actually incredible because, first of all, unimaginable that they would finish 5th in the group. But the way things came together at the end was just incredible.
Well, and despite the USA going into their last game with a very poor 3-win, 3-draw, 3-loss record, the way it's set up is basically 4 teams go on, the 4th place team getting a half spot. So you can really get by having a losing record. You just can't finish in the bottom 2. So despite a poor performance, all they needed was a point in Trinidad and Tobago. Actually a win, but a point could have been enough. As it happened, they lost. And yeah, like I said, a perfect storm of events saw them finish 5th. So quite an amazing series of events.
Yeah, I mean, my general impression, not just because of this World Cup, though, is that the USA is actually fairly weak on the road, which I guess that brings us to the recent qualification, 2022. But pay attention to their road record here.
Yeah. So the USA was one of 5 teams to questionably receive a bye to the final round in a qualification system that was blatantly unfair before COVID caused some changes to improve it somewhat.
Okay, then now it's time for my rant, Connor.
All right.
I think listeners maybe won't know that you were ranting about Wales in pot 4 at the beginning because you're a pretty mellow guy, but you were more vociferous about it when we talked about it before the podcast. My rant here is what they did here in 2022. This was before COVID. Is they just nominated the top 5 ranked FIFA teams to the Hex, the final round, and then there would be one more team, either basically El Salvador or Canada, nominated to the Hex. So the rest of the teams in CONCACAF would all go through an elaborate playoff system to narrow it down to one team, and then that one team played the 4th team in the Hex in a playoff to get to an intercontinental playoff. So basically, the other teams in CONCACAF were awarded a quarter spot if you weren't nominated to the final round by the FIFA rankings. What do you think?
Yeah, it was scandalous. And as Canadian fans, with Canada being on the bubble, what it basically meant is FIFA, using rankings that we know have their flaws, they basically handpick teams into the final round, no questions asked. I've never seen this in any region. I've never seen an attempt like this really in any international play. Where
I mean, it's not unlike the European Super League, where
absolutely.
they're just nominating the teams and just saying they're the best teams in Europe without any system to decide if they really are the best teams.
Yeah, and of course, USA failing to reach the last World Cup, could bring that into question. But yeah, it was basically, I think perhaps, and this is me speculating, but perhaps with the USA's failure in 2018, it was basically how can we avoid such a failure in the future? And their solution was to just put the teams into the final round of qualifying. So
Yeah,
yeah, it was blatantly unfair. Luckily, they did change it. Their solution was basically to go from a 6-team hex to an 8-team oct.
yeah.
So they expanded it a little bit.
Still a bit unfair, but yeah, it was better. And look what happened. Like a team that maybe wouldn't have been nominated to the hex ended up winning the group. I mean, that's why you have a qualification system to allow those teams to show their stuff.
Yeah, I mean, the beauty of the World Cup qualification is that every team starts with a chance of qualifying. And in North America, they had all but taken that away from
Yeah,
all but five or six teams.
I'm not sure if it all came down to America not reaching the cup in 2018, but the fact is that the reason CONCACAF, like logically, North and Central America should join with South America to become one big reason, and the reason that it doesn't happen is mostly because Mexico and USA don't want to give up the advantage that they have in CONCACAF.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, thank you for that psychological counseling lesson, Connor. I feel a whole lot better about things now.
All right. Are you good to continue?
Yes, yes, I am. Oh, I thought you were doing the 2022
That's right.
World
I'll
Cup.
I'll pick it up there. So yes, back to the octagon. The USA was strong at home, only suffering a draw with group winners Canada, who had not been among the anointed five, as we mentioned. The USA bested Mexico, but their weak road record, and specifically a loss in their final game in Costa Rica, saw them finish behind Mexico, so third of eight in the final group stage. And that poor road record included ties in El Salvador and Jamaica, and a loss in Panama. They finished tied with Costa Rica, and had the tie-breaking criteria been head-to-head games, they would have finished fourth and been forced into an intercontinental playoff. But because goal difference was used, they managed to get here automatically.
I gotta say, Connor, that was a bit of a closer shave than I realized.
Yeah, and it really, they won 7 of 8 at home and won 1 of 8 on the road, and some very costly losses, including and dropped points early on, like you said, and started with an away tie in El Salvador. Like that really nearly caught up to them.
That's
But
right. I can't help but point out that their only non-win at home was to who was that to? Canada.
yes, Canada were brilliant, but we'll cover them later.
Okay, let's move on to the regional competition, which we're only going to do an overview of here, and let's go. So the same pattern reflects in regional soccer as in world stage soccer, although it began slightly earlier. Shockingly, they either didn't enter or didn't qualify for the regional final from 1963 to 1981, and they were knocked out in the group stage in their first successful qualification in 1985. However, from 1989, they dominated along with Mexico. They finished second in 1989, and they won it in 1991 when it became the Gold Cup. Since then, they've rarely failed to finish in the top two, Their worst performance was in 2000 when they only reached the quarterfinals. I can't remember who won in 2000. Connor, do you?
Oh, right, Canada.
Oh, yes. It helps. We're terrible, Connor. It helps that the tournament is either totally or mostly held in the USA, especially in recent editions. After a good period, winning 3 out of 4 times from 2002 to 2007, they fell off, losing to Mexico 0-5 in 2009 and 2-4 in 2011, and turned their worst recent performance. Sorry, they turned in their worst recent performance in 2015 with a 4th-place finish. This was punctuated, though, with the title over Panama in 2013, although it was a tournament where few teams sent their A teams. That's a bit of a problem for the Gold Cup, with teams not sending their best. And also in 2013, sorry, I'm getting a bit lost here. Anyway, the point was that the Gold Cup does struggle from teams not sending their best players, and that's possibly because the tournament is held every 2 years and in the summertime, where players deserve a break. Anyway, things have gone back to a fine balance with Mexico, with the USA winning again in 2017 and Mexico in 2019. And we will take a look at 2019 and 2021 in detail.
Yeah, so USA qualifies automatically, so there is no qualifying to speak of. In 2019, they crushed Guyana and Trinidad and Tobago, revenge for 2018 on Trinidad, who knocked them out of World Cup qualifying. And then they finished with the win over Panama. Both teams there playing a B team just to figure out who was first in the group. The USA then beat Curacao and Jamaica in the knockout rounds before losing 1-0 to Mexico in the final.
There we have it. And we're also going to... Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just prepared to move on to 2021.
Okay, that's what I was going to introduce. Go ahead.
And actually, this one there was qualifying through the CONCACAF Nations League, kind of newly introduced.
Yeah, so a bit of irony there that they are qualifying for Gold Cups now, which is a bit ironic given what we said about World Cup qualification before. Sorry, go on.
Yeah. So in their Nations League Group A, it was a 3-team group. They lost in Canada, but otherwise won all games, Cuba being the other team. So they finished atop the group and qualified for the Cup.
Right, and that win by Canada was the first time in 34 years that Canada had beat the USA.
Yeah, very nice.
Mm-hmm.
Bringing kind of a B team to the Cup, the USA won all group stage games, or won all games by a score of 1-0, except for convincing 6-1 win over Martinique in the group stage. The tournament began with a tight game over Haiti and an early goal against a dominant Canada that saw them win all their games to finish first in the group stage. Late goals against Qatar and Jamaica saw them through to the final, where another late goal, this one in extra time at the 117th minute mark, saw them win over Mexico for their 7th Gold Cup title.
All right, so it looks like they've exchanged wins evenly since, is it 2017?
Yeah, with
back and forth between Mexico and USA. Yeah, even earlier, since 2013. All right, well, let's move on. They've actually played their recent games is a Gold Cup 2023 qualifying, which is done through the CONCACAF Nations League. And of course, USA is in League A there. Do you want to take us through how they've done, Connor?
Yeah, they've played 2 of their 4 games so far. That includes a 5-0 win over Grenada and a 1-1 draw in El Salvador. They also tied in El Salvador in qualifying for this World Cup. So, only a draw is as good as they can manage.
They're in second place, but they played one last game. But just one interesting note, although we're not going to look at players in this podcast, but the next one, you may be interested, Connor, that Jesus Ferreira, we've been talking in the player podcast about them kind of settling on a forward. And now there's another name in the mix with Jesus Ferreira scoring 4 of the 5 goals in their win over Granada.
Interesting.
Okay, well, otherwise they have played a few friendly games. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, those were. I'll just talk about the 2 most recent, which were in June of 2022.
Okay.
Actually, there was one in December 2021, which was a 1-0 win over Bosnia. But after that, it was a 2-0 loss in Costa Rica, but then a 3-0 win over Morocco. So, yeah. Not
Oh, sorry, I've added a couple of other games in the meanwhile.
I think those were their Nations League.
Yes, right, Nations League. Okay, gotcha. So once again, Connor, we're seeing that they're very strong at home and kind of suspect on the road.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, that is the end of the USA, and we're just left with mentioning their World Cup schedule.
Yeah, so they play Wales first, England second, and then Iran third.
All right. Well, that looks interesting. Okay, let's move on to talk about Iran. And their first international game was in 1941. And we'll just kind of overview their participation and achievements first. So their entry in the World Cup in 1974 was surprisingly late. And it was pretty inconsistent as they didn't enter in 1982 and were disqualified in 1986 for refusing a FIFA ruling to play their home games on neutral ground. They participated consistently since 1990, though. They have entered qualification for they first entered qualification for the Asian Cup much earlier in 1960, which was the second edition. They participated constantly in the Asian Cup from 1964 when the Cup was held in Israel. From 1964.
No, except for
from
1964.
from 1960, but they withdrew in 1964 when the Cup was held in Israel. That's a bit of an odd history because Israel's not part of Asia, but they were kind of bouncing from region to region before they ended up in the European region. Anyway, Iran has also been part of more local groups, but yeah, as I said, we're not going to get into local groups in this podcast. So let's go over to you for an overview of their achievements.
Right, so Iran has reached the World Cup 5 times, but have never passed the group stage. They won the Asian Cup 3 times in a row in 1968, 1972, and 1976, but have not won since. And I'll let you take us to a World Cup overview.
Okay, let's go to the a bit of a closer look at their World Cup history. So they have reached the World Cup 5 times. That was in 1978, 1998, 2006, and then 2 of the last 3 editions. Additionally, they came close in 2002, where they lost at the last step, an intercontinental playoff, which was really a dramatic encounter with Australia, who was part of the Oceanic region at that time. Iran's qualifications are actually invariably dramatic. All qualifications since 1990, with the exception of 2006, finished very tightly, regardless of whether it ended in success or failure. In general, they have become increasingly more reliable as one of the candidates from the Asian region who qualify for the Cup. And in their performances, they've become increasingly consistent. Since we're doing a deep dive, we won't overview their performances in the Cup in the overview. Rather, we'll just go straight ahead to the deep dive. So their first World Cup entry was in 1974, so it's quite impressive that their first successful campaign, their first success in reaching the World Cup was their second campaign in 1978. They went undefeated through the qualifying campaign, but they were out of their depth in the Cup. They lost to Netherlands and Peru by 3-goal margins. Netherlands' Rob Rensenbrink and Peru's Teofilo Cuballos scoring hat-tricks against them respectively. However, they did manage a draw with Scotland in that cup. Do you want to pick it up from 1998, Connor?
Yeah, so it would take 20 years for them to qualify again, which does bring us to 98. They did better here, earning their first World Cup win over the United States.
Who they meet here.
Yeah. Iran lost the other two by more respectable margins than in 1978, losing 0-1 to Yugoslavia and 0-2 to Germany. And throughout the tournament, they did not allow a goal in the first half. They also finished third ahead of the United States.
Great. Well, 2006 was their next appearance, and it started with a 1-3 loss to Mexico and then a 0-2 loss to Portugal. They did manage a point in their last game, drawing 1-1 without Angola, but this time they finished in last place. Once again, they were tough in their first half of games, with only one of the 6 goals against them coming in the first half.
2014 started more promisingly with a tie against Nigeria. It looked as if they would earn a well-deserved tie against Argentina until Lionel Messi scored the only goal of the game in the dying seconds of injury time on an excellent shot. And they came out of the game aggrieved about having not received a penalty call on a tackle in the box in the 54th minute, which really was a valid shout. They were less competitive with Bosnia in their third match and lost 1-3.
Right. Okay. Well, that takes us to 2018, which they also qualified for. And you're going to take us through that modern history.
Right. So 2018 was the most competitive group stage, even though economic sanctions prevented Iran from preparing well. Nike couldn't sell them boots, and their national jersey is the only one unavailable for purchase. They also had trouble arranging friendlies.
Which they seem to have this time, by the way.
Yeah. So their finals began with the win over Morocco, the only goal of the game earned on a free kick at the 95th minute, headed in by a Moroccan player. It was only their second win in World Cup history. A tight game with Spain in the second match saw them losing 0-1. And in the third game, Portugal went up a goal and could have made it 2 on a penalty in the 53rd minute, but it was missed. Iran made them pay by scoring an equalizer in injury time for what was a deserved draw. However, their 4 points was only enough to earn third place, and the 2 European teams advanced.
All right, so a pretty good showing for Iran there. And we are going to move on to World Cup 2018. No, we just did that.
Sorry, I guess I neglected to talk about qualifying for that tournament. So I'll just say, I'll just go back there briefly. So Iran were put into, they received a bye in the first round. In the second round group stage, they won 6 of their 8 games, tying the other 2 away in Turkmenistan and Oman to finish comfortably first place. That put them into the final group stage.
Okay, yeah. Just a note there that round 2 of 3 was also qualifying for the 2019 Asian Cup, as we'll see soon. So it meant they reached the Asian Cup through that second round.
Right, that's a good point. So then in the final round, Iran went undefeated. They won 6 of their games, drawing the other 4. And they were particularly strong at home, where they won their first 4 and then tied in Syria in their final game when they'd already qualified. But they finished ahead of South Korea, who they bested. And then Syria was the third place finisher, so Iran qualified automatically in first place.
Right, and that battle with South Korea is kind of an ongoing thing, I think, over the last 3 cups. We'll see how it panned out in 2022. Losing that last game or tying that last game with Syria was on a goal in injury time, so a bit of a bad finish there. And the last game in Asian qualifying usually throws up some interesting results. Okay, well, sorry about the confusion there, Connor.
Yeah, no, I did that in reverse order. But I'll now talk about qualifying for the 2022 World Cup. So they were not one of the bottom ranked 12 teams required to play in the preliminary round. Um, and then they put in a consistent enough performance to finish first in the round 2 of 3 group, losing to Iraq and Bahrain away, but otherwise winning all games. Hong Kong and Cambodia rounding out the group. Should mention that Iraq beat visitors Iran on a goal in the 92nd minute, which was perhaps aided by a red card to Iran in the 81st minute. But Iran and Iraq have a very natural rivalry, which plays out on the football pitch.
That's right. And this qualification actually took place over the COVID period. So the Asian Federation was kind of making a desperate attempt to finish in time to fit in the final round. So all of the matches, I don't think all of them, but I think maybe the last 6 or so were completed through a makeup tournament. And generally that makeup tournament was in the pot 1 country, although in this case it was in Bahrain. And so kind of an interesting, it kind of does explain Bahrain beating them, which is probably to Bahrain's advantage there.
Yeah. It's all academic, really, in that Iran, was through to the next round.
Yeah, exactly. And by the way, this also qualifies them for the 2023 Asian Cup, which we may be doing a podcast on early in the new year next year.
Yeah, but carrying on, in the final round, which was again a 16 group, they were bested by South Korea. But those were the only drop points, and their consistency saw them finish first in the qualifying group, South Korea giving up the lead with a final game loss to UAE. So Iran win the group, but the top 2 advance to the World Cup. So Iran just gets the bragging rights there.
Yeah, I was a bit upset about that because South Korea beat Iran in the second last game to move into first place, and then they dropped points to UAE. So once again, Iran comes out on top. But that's pretty promising because South Korea is a pretty decent team, and they seem to consistently beat them in qualifying.
Mm-hmm.
All right, well, let's move on to the overview of the regional cup, the Asian Cup, and that was last played in 2019, but it began in 1956. Iran struggled in the early Asian Cup. In fact, they didn't participate in 1956, and they failed to qualify in 1960, and then they withdrew in 1964, as we saw. But since 1968, they've reached every cup. And only once in 1992 did they fail to pass the group stage. And in fact, they ruled the Asian Cup from 1968 to 76 with 3 wins in a row, 3 title wins in a row. However, they've not reached a final since 1976, despite taking 3rd place regularly. From 2007 to 2015, they were stopped at the quarterfinal stage 3 times in a row. So let's see if they did any better in 2019.
So 2018 World Cup qualifying made up the first 2 rounds of qualification. So that put them through to this tournament. One of the favorites for the tournament were Iran, and in fact, increasingly so as it progressed. They finished first in the group stage, easily beating Yemen and Vietnam, then beating Iraq in a rivalry-laden game that actually meant little since both had advanced.
You mean tying Iraq?
That's right. But it still saw them in first place. They beat Oman and China, maintaining clean sheets throughout, but lost heavily to Japan 3-0 in the semifinals. So once again, the semifinals proving a ceiling for them.
Exactly. So yeah, they really looked like they were going to go all the way there until that poor game against Japan. That is a bit out of date now in 2019. So let's see how they've done in recent games.
You mentioned struggle to arrange friendly. They actually had a friendly organized in Canada, but the game was postponed late, um, kind of for political reasons.
Yeah, I think it was. Yeah.
But they have arranged one friendly. That was a 2-1 or 1-2 home loss to Algeria. But they haven't played since, so not a lot of recent games to go off for Iran.
Yeah, I'm just going to check here whether they have arranged any more, but I don't think they have. Teams are kind of, even as we speak, still arranging a couple of friendlies, just their kind of pre-World Cup friendlies. But we said in 2018 that Iran was having trouble getting anyone to play them. And I see here that they have arranged a friendly with Uruguay in September now. Oh, no, that's already in our graphics. But yeah, that's the only one that they have.
Right.
So maybe maybe they'll get a couple of games in there in the build up. But let's take a look at their World Cup schedule.
So they begin with probably the most difficult game first. They play England, and then after that they play Wales and end with the United States.
All right, sounds good. Let's move on to our fourth team then. Wales. We're going to look at Wales. Their first international game was in 1876. So because they formed a team pretty quickly after England invented the game. And we'll take a look at their participation and achievements. So Wales played their first international game in 1876, making them the third oldest soccer country behind England and Scotland. They were part of the British home nations that withdrew from FIFA in 1928, and they were thus not involved in any of the pre-war World Cups, just like England. That group rejoined FIFA in 1946, and Wales first entered the World Cup in 1950 and the Euro Cup in its second edition in 1964. And they participated consistently in both cups since. You lived in Wales, Connor.
I did. I spent a year there. That was in the Gary Speed days, so just kind of as they were beginning their ascendancy. But in terms of achievements, before recent times, they reached only one World Cup. That was in 1958. And they made good of it, reaching the quarterfinals. They came close again in 1966 when the Cup was hosted by England, but really not otherwise. In the Euro Cup, they never reached the finals until 2016, though they've come close more often. They reached final playoffs in 1976 and 2004, and finished second in their qualifying groups in 1984 and 92. So their qualification in 2016 was long in coming, and they made the best of it, reaching the semifinals. Interestingly, Wales have never been knocked out at a group stage in a major tournament.
Yeah, they certainly make the best of it when they get there, don't they?
Absolutely.
All right, well, let's turn our attention to their World Cup history, beginning with an overview. So their single appearance in the World Cup finals was actually by a strange stroke of luck, involving everyone refusing to play Israel. They accepted and they won to reach the 1958 World Cup, which we'll cover in more detail below. They also came close to qualifying in 1962 and closer still in 1966. But from that time, they have steadily slipped to third and then fourth and then fifth place finishes in 2006 and 2014. Of course, they did better since, which we will talk about. In terms of our deep dive into the World Cup finals, until 2022, they had reached only the one cup in 1958. There they tied all games with Hungary, Mexico, and Sweden. That was an inconsistent performance, given that Hungary were regarded as the strongest team in the world by far. Only a few years earlier, they were kind of coming out of it by 1958 because of the Soviet invasion in 1956. But anyway, they did well to tie Hungary, who were still quite strong, and but didn't do well to tie Mexico, who had never earned a point in their previous 9 games of World Cup play. So they finished tied in the group with Hungary on points. And Hungary's superior goal difference was not a tie-breaking criterion at the time. So rather, a special playoff game was the tiebreaker. And they came back from a goal down at the half to win 2-0 over Hungary. That brought them to the quarterfinals, where a young Pele scored the only goal of the game to knock them out.
Wonder whatever happened to him.
Yeah, I don't know why I mentioned him. I thought it was an interesting name. All right, well, you're going to take us through their 2018 World Cup qualifying campaign?
Yeah, so they entered qualifying as the top-seeded team, which is really a mistake in the FIFA seeding system. And it proved so as the group proved competitive among the top 4 teams, which included themselves, Serbia, Ireland, and then to a lesser extent, Austria, who they bested. 5 draws in a row, including a tie at home to Georgia, caught up with them at the end when they suffered their single loss, a home loss to Ireland. Ireland then replaced them for second place into the advancing playoff position. So 3rd out of 6, despite being the pot 1 team, but as we said, that's not really reflective of their actual strength.
Yeah, they had come off a good Euro Cup, but certainly can't be considered a top European team. That's ridiculous, really.
Yeah. All right.
Oh,
so we'll move on to 2022 qualifying. So a tie at home to Estonia was the only lapse in qualifying, though they were bested by a strong Belgium team. However, a tie in their last game with them gave them enough to finish in second place ahead of Czech Republic, who they bested. That sent them into the regional playoffs, where they beat first Austria and then Ukraine to reach the World Cup.
Right, and that game was quite recently in June, where Ukraine scored an own goal, right?
That's right. Yeah, Wales winning 1-0.
All right. Okay, so let's take a look at the regional competition history. So the Regional Cup overview. Despite never qualifying for the Euro Cup until 2016, when it was expanded to 24 teams, they 4 times were just one step away. They reached the final playoffs in 1976 and 2004, and they finished second in their qualifying group in 1984 and 1992. So their qualification in 2016 was a long time in coming, and just as in the 1958 World Cup, they made the best of it, this time reaching the semi-finals. They have never, therefore, been knocked out at a group stage either in the World Cup or in the Euro Cup. That's kind of an interesting little data point, hey, Connor?
Yeah, and of course that continued in their most recent tournament, which was the Euro Cup 2020. In terms of qualifying, they were bested by Croatia and finished behind them, but second in the qualifying group was enough for an automatic place in the finals. In the tournament, Wales tied Switzerland and beat Turkey before losing to eventual champions Italy to finish second in the group stage. Wales and Switzerland actually finished tied on head-to-head points and goal difference. So the matter was decided on overall goal difference, which put Wales ahead. And then in the round of 16 match, they were beaten heavily by the impressive Denmark 4-0.
Right. So there we go. Once again, never knocked out in a group stage. Okay, well, they have played a few games since in the UEFA Nations League, where they're in League A, so in the top league there. They also had those 2 World Cup qualifying playoffs, which you said were kind of delayed. But do you want to take us through especially their Nations League games?
Yeah, so they were promoted to Group A, so they're in kind of tough in a group with Poland, Netherlands, and Belgium. They lost away in Poland, then lost at home to Netherlands. They managed to tie Belgium 1-1. They actually historically do very well against Belgium.
Yeah, it's kind of funny.
Yeah, but they lost to the Netherlands 3-2. So they sit with just a point from 4 games so far.
Yeah, I think the League A air is a bit thin for them up there. They're doing well to be there, but a bit out of their league, eh?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, we'll mention their schedule.
yeah,
For the World Cup.
sorry, I forgot to write if they have any friendlies. So while you're talking about the schedules, I'll take a quick look.
Sure. Well, Wales will start their World Cup off with a match against the United States. They play Iran second, and then they finish with England.
That's right, and actually, just those 2 Nations League games to finish out that thing is the only thing they've got scheduled at the moment. Okay, well, let's move on to part 3. That ends the kind of the history section of the game, and we're going to start actually with just an overview of the kind of a summary, and then a comment on their recent form coming into this cup. So we'll begin with England, and I'll do the summary, and Connor will speak to their recent form. So here we go. England's football history has more disappointment than glory. Their only true glory is the 1966 World Cup, and even that was marred by a questionable goal. But even if that doesn't constitute a strong period, or sorry, I should say that doesn't constitute a strong period, and they don't have one to speak of since their biggest successes are surrounded by flat or poor results. Third place in the 1968 Euro Cup, for example, is surrounded by a non-qualification in 1964 and in 1972. And then their 1996 semi-final finish in the Euro Cup became took place before a group stage exit in the previous cup, and was followed by the same in 2000. This second place in their recent cup may turn out to be a strong period for them. But really, England's psychological state has been more defining than their record. For much of their history, it's been kind of an unjustified self-superiority, though mixed uncomfortably with hand-wringing anxiety. They declared themselves the best team in the early years, but did not take part in the cup. When they did, they were taken down a peg by teams like the USA or Hungary, or USA and Hungary, or performed poorly in cups. Their high expectations have delivered some results at the game level, or especially in recent qualifying campaigns where they're imperious. But those expectations have often been a barrier to them, leaving them stifled on the field and unable to perform to their potential. Most evidently from 2010 to 2016. They seem stunned, for example, by USA's goal in 2010, which left them unable to recover from their keeper's mistake. And it was similar when Iceland took a lead against them in 2016. How about their recent form, Connor?
Yeah, well, good showings in 2018 and 2020, maybe putting this defining form behind them, at least the deer in the headlights form that has led to many drab performances over the past 20 years at least. The self-superiority seems to survive all contrary evidence, and was acknowledged as a problem by their own FA in the need for greater humility when their suggested hashtag for a World Cup bid, football's coming home, was rejected. The recent qualification runs do support this confidence, but the pressure it comes with still acts as a barrier, as arguably it did in the 2020 Euro final shootout.
All right, moving on to USA, which is a bit shorter here. So in summary, USA is known for their grit. That was certainly evident in the early years, especially in their tenacious clinging to a 1-0 win over England in the 1950 World Cup. They all but disappeared from the soccer scene after that, but they came roaring back in around 1990 to rival Mexico as the top team in their region. They also battled their way into respectability at the World Cup, looking feeble in a couple of campaigns in the 1990s, but passing the group stage 3 out of 4 times from 2004 to 2014.
The USA have suffered a decline in recent years. Their failure to qualify for the 2018 World Cup might be seen as errant, except they were unconvincing in 2022, also with a particularly poor road record. The 2019 and 2021 Gold Cup wins do argue their strength in the region, but the tournaments are hosted at home where they are strong, so it leaves a bit of doubt how they will perform in World Cups outside of America, although that's not a worry for them in 2026. In the USA's favor, they are a determined and resilient team with plenty of talent, even if that choice of riches sometimes confuses the matter for them. Um, Really, one can't help believe that they will bounce back from their recent disappointments.
Right, and I think we made a mistake there. We said they won the Gold Cup in 2019, but it was actually second place.
That's right.
Second place there. All right, let's move on to a summary of Iran. So their 3 Asian Cups in a row from 1968 to 1976 saw them kings of Asia, even if they didn't reflect that in World Cup play with only 1 qualification in 1978. They remained among the top teams with top 4 finishes in the 1980s and sometimes in the decade after. From the turn of the millennium in particular, they have been a rung below the top teams in the region, finishing in the quarterfinals of the Asian Cup and finishing anywhere from second to fourth in their final World Cup qualifying groups, even when they did qualify. They seem more like a top Asian team in World Cup qualifying, winning their group over South Korea 3 times in a row from 2014. But unlike Japan and South Korea, they have not passed the group stage of a World Cup.
Iran seemed to creep ever closer to passing a World Cup group stage, once vulnerable to second-tier teams like China and Syria. Their consistency in qualification has improved, allowing them to once again finish ahead of South Korea in 2022 qualifying, despite being bested by them. Also, reaching the semi-final stage of the Asian Cup for the first time since 2004 does now seem to put them among the top Asian teams again in recent years.
All right, a bit of improvement, it seems, with Iran, and we will move on to Wales. Finally, the few times they have been successful, Wales has been very successful. Interestingly, they've never been knocked out in a group stage in either the World Cup or Euro Cup play. Their only World Cup in 1958 saw them reaching the quarterfinals, and their only Euro Cup in 2016 saw them reaching the semi-finals. Correction on that, they reached the round of 16 in 2020 also. That should not overshadow the fact that they don't reach the cup most of the time. And in the case of the World Cup, they have very rarely even come close.
Wales's recent form, then, is the best period in their history. It is largely due to 2 great players in Gareth Bale and Aaron Ramsey, as well as a traditionally solid defense that has found more consistency than in the past. The supporting cast, though, should not be overlooked, but is made up of mostly second-tier players, although it's arguably stronger in 2022 than it was in 2016. Having said that, they did well to reach Group A in the UEFA Nations League in 2020 to 21, but it's proved too rich for them, and even though it's still in progress, they are already demoted back to League B. What will become of Wales after their stars age out is a matter of speculation. However, they are currently making the best of them.
All right. Do you agree with those summaries? I felt we were a little hard on England there. Do you think?
I think with England, you have to take the long view. They've had some good recent results, but like you said, their only true glory was in 1966. That was a long time ago. A lot of other teams have come and gone and won Euros and won World Cups, and smaller teams like Denmark have won the Euros and Greece, and England still haven't. So, I think taking the long view, I think it's fair to say that they consider themselves a bigger team than perhaps they are.
Yeah, I mean, it is a really odd mix of kind of overconfidence or self-superiority, as we said. and then this kind of anxious side to them. I'm not really sure how to balance those two things.
Yeah. And obviously the Premier League is strong, but there's obviously a lot of foreign players there as well. So you can't always just equate the strength of their domestic league with the strength of the national team.
Right, well said. Well, we're already launching into our discussion a little bit, but we are going to cover the rankings of each team. Do you want to handle that?
Yeah, so England, the pot one team, were fifth in the FIFA rankings, and are fifth in the FIFA rankings and 12th in ELO. Anything you want to mention about England there?
No, not really. They've kind of always been in the top 10. In June 2015, they dropped down to 15th in FIFA rankings, but at that time they were 8th in the ELO rankings. So, yeah, they've dipped a bit below 10, but it's kind of a moot point.
Yeah. The USA are currently 14th in FIFA and 24th in ELO. Any comments there?
Sorry. Yeah, they've been up and down more than England, kind of ranging between, I would say, around 35 in both ranking systems. I personally don't think that the FIFA is right here. I don't think USA is 14th, and I think 24th is closer to the truth. How about you?
Yeah, I agree, but again, we'll get into that, I guess, in our discussion.
Yeah.
Looking at Iran, they're very similar in both ranking systems. They're 23rd in FIFA and 25th in ELO, so just one spot back of the United States, which is interesting.
Yeah, they were, as we said, they had kind of some weak points. So they were 51st in FIFA in December 2014 and 42nd in ELO, and even below those two numbers in December 2009. But then way back in 2005, they were 17th in both. So kind of coming and going. But I think we said they've become more consistent in recent years. So those rankings look right to me.
Yeah, and then Wales, they're 19th in FIFA. So actually ahead of Iran, even though Wales are the pot four team. And they're 23rd in the ELO ranking. So actually ahead of both USA and Iran in the ELO rankings. So those three teams are 23rd, 24th, and 25th.
Wow.
So perhaps some indication of a tight group.
Yeah, we tend to trust the ELO rankings a bit more. If we've talked about USA and Iran being up and down, Wales was 114th in FIFA rankings in June 2011. That was just 78th, which is low enough in ELO rankings, and they've kind of crept up since then. I know you were handing the mic over to me for kind of a historical perspective, but I couldn't help getting into my opinions on that.
All good. Well, we'll discuss now the head-to-heads.
Okay.
So this is where teams have met in competitive matches. So England versus USA. The USA has a better record. England has no wins and one tie and one loss.
Well, you got to think that's a bit aggravating for England, but that's the case. They've only met the two times. We talked a lot about the 1950 World Cup win by the USA, and then in 2010, they seemed to get nervy after USA scored, and it ended a 1-1 tie. So interesting to see how it'll turn out in this cup, hey?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, history on the side of the USA, surprisingly.
Uh-huh.
England and Iran have never met, so there's nothing to speak of there. England and Wales have met 11 times in competitive matches, so that's World Cups, Euros, or qualifying. And England have 10 wins, and there's just one tie for Wales, England undefeated.
Right, so they don't seem to, get disrupted the way Belgium does when Belgium plays Wales. And even in recent times, 2012, England won twice, and 2016 in that Euro Cup where Wales did well, England still won. So they don't seem rattled by Wales.
That's right. We've mentioned USA versus England USA versus Iran. favors Iran. One win for Iran in their one competitive meeting.
That's right. Yeah, Iran only has 2 World Cup wins, and this was the first of them in 1998. It kind of adds a bit of an interesting twist to this World Cup.
Yeah. And then the USA have never met Wales, and Wales have never met Iran either.
Right. Okay. So some interesting turns there, especially USA's winning record over England. And of course, the one meeting between Iran and USA doesn't mean much, but it adds a bit of spice. Okay, we're going to move on to odds, and we will take a look at the odds of the teams to advance from the group. And I've compiled these odds by looking at, I think, 3 or 4 websites and just compiling the odds. So we're not really talking about gambling here. We're talking really about how odds makers are looking at this team. And we're going to talk about whether we ultimately agree with the chances they give. Do you want to take us through, Connor?
Yeah, so England are given a 95% chance or likelihood to advance from this group. USA and Iran, fascinatingly, are identical on average at 47.2% to advance. And Wales, by the odds makers, are the outsiders at just a 19.4% chance to advance.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting contrast here, Connor, because I also compiled odds on which team would win the group. I didn't think they were interesting as these ones to advance, but in that one, the USA is given a 15% chance of winning, Wales a 14% chance, and Iran a 5% chance. Those numbers don't mean much in themselves, but relatively speaking, it's so different than what's presented here. I think the takeaway from that is that there's a lot of confusion about these bottom 3 teams and how they're going to place out.
All right, well, let's cut through that confusion with our discussion and predictions.
All right. Well, I think it looks like England's gonna win the group, and almost I agree with the odds. It's very unlikely that they wouldn't advance. I think England's biggest obstacle is their own nerves, which they seem to be overcoming in the last few years. But I wonder if that penalty shootout will throw them back into it, or perhaps their history with USA will throw them back into it. Too. How about you?
Yeah, I think England seem to have sorted out some of the kind of the mentality issues that has been their problem. So I see them, yeah, very likely advancing and most likely in first place too. I think we're seeing in England over the last few years that on the whole has been fairly consistent, and that consistency should be good enough to see them win this group.
True. I mean, but I don't think you can apply their consistency in qualifying to their consistency in tournaments. I mean, sometimes they seem to freeze on the pitch, like against Iceland, and I find them quite dull to watch because of that. I mean, you look at them playing in the league in England, and you often don't see their talent really coming to fruition because they just seem nervous as hell.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's a different England. I think it's I think a slightly younger team, a slightly different mentality, a younger manager. I think those have been issues of the past, but on the whole, I expect England to put them right, as really they've been doing in recent tournaments.
Yeah, I still think the issue for them is really overcoming themselves. I mean, they're a lot stronger than each of these teams by every objective measure. I think we put it well when we said that the main thing in their way is their own psychology.
Yeah. How
Uh,
do you see the other 3 teams, USA, Iran, Wales? Obviously, ELO puts them almost identical. The odds makers seem to have a bit of confusion. What do you think?
yeah, I don't know. I expressed an opinion when you showed the rankings. I think 14th in the FIFA rankings is outrageous. And I agree with the ELO rankings that they're all really close together. I really have a difficult time uh, uh, they're all from different regions, and it's hard to tell like how strong the CONCACAF region is in relation to the Asian region. Do you have any opinions on that?
I mean, you would say that UEFA is the toughest region, so Wales have come through that and have done well to be one of 13 European teams. When you look at some of the teams like, Italy that have missed out, Sweden, some other strong teams. So I think, Wales have done well. I think, USA and Iran are teams that we would expect to qualify. USA did, but not really in any all that convincing manner. And Iran, I mean, they've kind of established themselves as one of the top Asian teams. So I think it's not a given, but they should expect to qualify. So I think for Wales, just being here, it's a bigger achievement for them than USA or Iran.
Are you saying that you kind of agree with them being lower than USA and Iran in these odds and in the FIFA rankings?
I don't. I tend to look towards ELO as we often do. I think they're all fairly competitive. What I would say though is that I think obviously Wales being a pot 4 team that's not really a pot 4 team kind of makes the rankings less clear. Having watched a fair bit of the USA in Gold Cups and in qualifying, I have to say I'm not convinced by the USA or by their coach Greg Berthaler, who I don't think really knows what his best team is. So I think the USA are a bit inflated. I think Iran have done well in World Cup qualifying, but haven't proven in the Asian Cup that they're kind of an elite team in the region there.
Yeah.
And I think Wales are really a confident team, a together team. They have a player like Gareth Bale that can win a game, but that's built on top of a real defensive solidity. So, I disagree with the odd makers. I'd probably favor Wales out of those 3 teams.
Right. I was just clarifying, but you said a couple of things that I want to address. Like, in terms of regionalism, Wales coming out of Europe is a much bigger achievement than USA winning CONCACAF and Iran winning Asia. I think I totally disagree with these odds to advance. Wales at 20% and USA and Iran at 47%. I would put them all even. I'm actually getting back to another point you made. Like, I might actually put USA a bit lower. I mean, they do have the grit, and sometimes they find that grit, even though they may not look like they're coming into the tournament with it. They may find it in the tournament. But I got to agree with you about the manager. Like, they brought a B team to the Gold Cup in 2021. And most other teams like Canada were preparing their team for the 2022 World Cup qualification, the final round there. America, all through that qualification, seemed completely confused. I talked a little bit about when you talked about the population of the US and they have so many players to choose from. That qualification is a process of honing that players down to a squad to meet this World Cup. And I don't think they've done that at all. We pointed out that Jesus Ferreira scored 4 of their goals in a recent game. And I haven't even heard of that guy before. I know I have heard of him. He's in and around, but he wasn't one of their forwards. In terms of forwards, they were toying with Pepe, who looked like he was going to be their forward for a while. And you name it, like Jordan Morrison.
Zardes.
Yeah, and they seem to have come to no conclusions, especially on the forward line. Do you agree? Like, that would be a real concern for me as an American fan.
Yeah, I mean, USA undoubtedly have some great players playing in big leagues like Serginho Dest and Christian Pulisic, but yeah, you don't see that team very often. You see a lot of tinkering and a lot of experimentation, and I don't think that's great for going into a World Cup. And I think you can compare them to a Welsh team that's been very consistent and has had a core group of players really since that 2016 Euros. A lot of the guys are still there. They know who their best 11 is, and have some new players coming in. So I think it's, that alone makes me favor Wales going into a tournament like this.
Yeah, and it actually adds a little bit to Iran too, because I think they're closer to the Wales end of things, as opposed to the England and USA end of things, where they have so many players to choose from. England has done better than USA at honing that into a squad, but there's something to be said for that. Maybe second tier teamsmanship that Iran and Wales have, but they know how to play together.
And I think it's easy to write off Iran kind of as an unknown, but like, let's not forget, in the last World Cup, they beat Morocco, they tied Portugal, and were very unlucky to lose to Spain. They collected 4 points from a very difficult group and nearly advanced. So, they were kind of a dark horse team then, and they could be again here.
Yeah, I'm actually surprised at the odds before us, the odds to advance, where they're rated the same as the USA, because I thought most people would think the other odds I mentioned about winning the group, where USA and Wales are kind of even, and Iran is way back with just a 5% chance, and I think Iran is totally going to be overlooked. Maybe that'll be something in their favor. But as you say, anyone who knows their soccer knows that Iran came very close in 2018 to overthrowing either Portugal or Spain. They were kind of unlucky. And and this is an easier group in a sense for them to get through. So I give them even odds to USA and to Wales. I really, even after our discussion, don't know what to decide.
Well, and we mentioned order of games, and this could actually work in Wales's favor because they play England last. If England beat USA and beat Iran, and that's a big if, they may be able to rest players for that final game against Wales, which could give Wales perhaps an advantage. And we know Wales will be up for the game against England.
Yeah, do you think England would actually help Wales to get through?
I don't think so. I mean, I think you ask a Welsh fan if they would help England, the answer is absolutely not. And I don't think there's a lot of love the other way.
Yeah, but on the other hand, like strategically, I think England would definitely field a B team if they won those first two games.
Oh, for sure, and
which would
that's
be an
just,
advantage to Wales.
yeah, and that's in their own self-interest to rest some players and get a look at some other players.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Well, Connor, I've been very decisive, I believe, but I feel that you're really beating around the bush here. So lay it on me, Connor. How is this group going to turn out?
Well, perhaps my bias comes through a little bit. I'm going to say England first. I'm pretty confident about that. I am going to say Wales second, but I think it's because Wales do well in tournaments and they have, perhaps the best player in the group in Gareth Bale. Or maybe that's a bold statement, but I think Wales are capable of it. I think the USA are overrated. They're a good team and often a likable team, but I don't think this is the strongest USA team we've seen recently. And then I think Iran are very capable, and I think will get close and be competitive. So I'm going to go England, Wales, and I'm going to go Iran ahead of the United States. They'll possibly tie it on points.
All right. Well, it comes down to my prediction, and I gotta say, in writing it up, I also said England, Wales, Iran, and USA. I'm actually tempted to say Iran in second, but maybe that's just to be contrarian. I don't think England is guaranteed as much as a lot of people will think. And I think their nerves might get to them. I think that's the only thing that can undermine them. But even with that, I think they'll at least pass. And the other three for me is really a roll of the dice. But we talked about Wales having the third game, and I think that might give them a slight advantage, especially if England isn't upset by their nerves. USA's form in qualifying. I don't know whether we would view the World Cup as away games, but if it's an away game, if that's what it is for the USA, I would put them last because they're so weak on the road. However, they do sometimes find the grit, which is what I like about the American team. And then I think Iran is completely overlooked and will be much more competitive in this cup than people will give them credit for. So I'm going to change my original thing and go England, Iran, Wales, USA.
Interesting. Does the World Cup being played in Asia factor into your thinking?
Oh man, we definitely should have mentioned that. Yeah, I mean, in terms of like we know culturally that they're not like the Arab countries and stuff, but they've been playing there. They've been playing against Qatar and Bahrain and Saudi Arabia, so they'll definitely have an advantage in terms of the terrain, and in terms of the weather, whereas the others might struggle with it. That's why I'm gonna rewrite history and say that's why I think they're going to be second. But no, I think it's a big factor. How about you?
Yeah, I think it will help them, and it's factored a little bit into my thinking of why I put them ahead of the USA, also considering the USA's poor form, but I think they're going to come up just short and put Wales second.
Yeah, it's funny because I have a bit of a bias towards Asian teams. I always want to see kind of the weaker regions or the historically weaker regions do well at the Cup. I should have a bias towards Wales, and I'll be pulling for them to finish second, and I think it's quite possible. Really, my overall conclusion is I really think it's a toss-up between the three teams, Iran, USA, and Wales.
Well, I agree, so I think that's a good point to end with.
All right, well, that brings us to the end of the podcast, and thanks for listening.
Yeah, those who are unfamiliar with our podcast might want to keep listening for some information on some of our previous series. But if you're turning off now, goodbye, and we'll hope you'll tune in to our next in the series.
Okay, further listening. We've done 9 different series of podcasts if you're interested in a deeper dive. Some of the information may be dated, but some of the histories focus on different aspects of the team histories, so it can help you to get to know teams more intimately.
Yes, as mentioned, this is our 10th series, and we have done at least one series on every region except Oceania. We have files for that region too, and we'll do one down the road so as not to leave them out. But let's go region by region.
Right, so Europe, our first series was a group-by-group podcast on the teams of Euro 2020. That was played in the summer of 2021. And for South America, we also did a group-by-group podcast on the teams in Copa America 2021.
For North America, we have done 3 series on CONCACAF. The first was a group-by-group podcast on the teams in the 2021 Gold Cup. That included a look at Qatar. The second was a preview of the 8 teams in the final round of World Cup CONCACAF qualifying. That came with our first player series, where we went team by team through the players. The third was an update halfway through that qualification.
Yes, and for Asia, we did a group-by-group podcast on the 12 teams in the final round of World Cup qualifying, and that included a deep dive into each team's World Cup qualifying history.
We have done 3 series on African teams. The first was a group-by-group podcast on the 24 teams in the 2021 African Cup, played in early 2022. The second, done around the same time, was a team-by-team series on the players for each of those teams. Third and finally, we have recently concluded a series on almost all teams in Africa, a group-by-group examination of the 12 qualifying groups for the 2023 African Cup. This included a deep dive into their African Cup history, which was quite extensive. This provides a look into some of the lesser teams that rarely even qualify for the African Cup.
Right, and we realize that not everyone is interested in the level of detail that we go into. So starting from that series, the 2023 African Cup series, we're editing our media casts into shorter versions. Generally, for groups and teams, this will just be a summary and discussion segments of the longer podcasts. And for the player ones, just the sections on the squad's overall strength and a list of the main players that we expect to reach the competition. So that's usually 2 or 3 groups per episode.
Yes, otherwise each long version of the series contains a deep dive into the matter at hand. So if it's African Cup qualification, for example, it's a deep dive into the team's history of African Cup qualification. Or if it's the World Cup qualification, a deep dive into each team's history in qualifying for the World Cup.
Right, and all of those podcasts can be found in our library at soccerphiles.captivate.fm. That's Soccerphiles with a PH in the middle and an S at the end. And we also provide a link to our website and other relevant material in the show notes for each media cast. And in general, to find us, you can type Soccer Files Canada into Google, and it's easy to find your way from there. Or just check out the show notes for this or any of our media casts, and it'll be easy to navigate from there.
Okay, see you in our future media casts.